Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. As you can see, I'm not in my sling today. My doctor said I can move my arm out a little bit. I can't really lift it up too high, but that's okay because the engine's at a good height for me to do what it is I need to do anyway. And I'm gonna be using my wife to give me a hand to take the cylinder head off the motor. So today's goal is to take off the cylinder head. If you look up here in the top corner of the screen, or a little link, or there should be a picture here of the diagram of the order to fasten the bolts to the engine block, the cylinder head to the engine block. We're actually going to be going in the reverse order of that. So as you can see, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and so on and so forth goes in a spiral pattern. This engine right here is actually head studded, meaning there is a stud where the bolt shaft would normally be, and there is an ARP nut to securely fasten it to the block. We're not going to be reusing those studs, mainly because I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with them. I just rather have new fasteners in there. Little quirk, little nuance that I have, no big deal. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. So I'm gonna go get some gloves on so that I don't continue to get my hands super dirty. And then I'm gonna get the appropriate tools, which is just a breaker bar, an extension, and a 13mm 12-point socket because I have ARP head studs. So yeah, enough talking, let's get into it. With that being said, before we get into it, I do have the OEM manual for an engine overhaul. So when we're using that as guidance, that's where I got this picture up from. Put it up on the screen. I will put it up on the screen one more time. And if you see me go back and forth a couple of times, that's what I'm going to be referencing is the actual manual. So yeah, now we'll get some gloves on. So you can see here, I'm following the diagram that I had put up earlier in the screen during the intro. Try my best to, try not to use too much on my left arm. My left arm's still a little sore from the surgery, but it looks like I'm going pretty good. And again, it's very important that you follow the sequence properly when you're removing cylinder heads, camshafts, crankshafts, main crankshaft bolts, all that. It's very important. You'll find out a little bit later on in this video why it's so important, and generally speaking what the proper procedure is. So here we are. I'm using my electric impact here to take off the fasteners. Same deal. I'm going in that same pattern. I'm taking my time, making sure I'm fully seated onto that fastener so that the impact doesn't slip. And then here it is. I'm going to attempt to take off the washers that are underneath the fasteners with a magnet. Typically what happens is that you have a film of oil underneath it, or oil gets between the fastener, the washer, and the machine surface. It becomes very tacky and it becomes nearly impossible to take it off. So if you don't get it off the first time, it's really not that big a deal. Okay, so you can see this is one of the cylinder head studs. This fastener actually gave me some problems. There's no reason whatsoever why this should be attached the way it is. And I can also see this oil looks pretty gritty. It looks bad. I don't know how bad it is, what the extent is, but we're going to clean it up and really take a good examination of it. So the cylinder head is not fastened anymore to the block. It's just being held in there with the studs and the dowel pins. So right now what we're going to do, we're going to take off the camshafts, and we're going to take out the spark plugs. I'll leave the spark plugs in there until the very last minute, just to prevent any other crud from getting down in there. Just remember, when you're taking apart everything and you're doing a tear down to do some diagnostics, you need to make sure that you are keeping everything in order. So on my workbench back there, hang on. Workbench back there, you can see behind my computer, I'm actually putting everything in order. I'm gonna move my computer out of the way. We're gonna, keep everything in order. And notice I'm taking everything apart by hand, or I'm breaking everything loose by hand. And then if I hear any resistance on my impact, that's when I stop, take it apart by hand, and then go to continue to examine it. So let's keep going.
Okay, so before we go any further, I just want to explain exactly what it is that I just did. So I just took off the exhaust cam and its bearing caps. So yes, it looks like I was being a little rough. I assure you, you're only giving gentle taps to break the seal, so to speak, loose. So what happens is that, let me go ahead and give you guys a better shot inside. Okay, so what happens is that these bearing caps, and this is on any engine, it doesn't necessarily mean just Evo. So what happens is that inside these, oil will inevitably seep between two mating surfaces, right? Especially when the entire top of the valve train is covered in oil. It is what it is. It's really not that big a deal. So in order to break that vacuum loose, what you do is that you extend the bolt out ever so slightly and use that as a leverage point. So when I used to rebuild, okay, so as I was saying, so when I used to rebuild diesel truck motors, while it doesn't sound like, oh, it's a diesel, it doesn't have as tight clearances. In fact, they actually have tighter clearances than a lot of gasoline engines. But I digress. So it used to be the exact same technique that I used to use when I was breaking out the valve train, main bearing caps, what have you. Oil somehow is always going to seep into places where you don't think oil is going to be, mainly down into these the recesses where the cams are. Now if you look here, obviously in order to locate each cam bearing cap, there is a dowel that goes in here. And that, again, another spot where the oil is. And if you even look on here in the back, there's a little spot where the rear cap has to have silicone in there. So obviously not everything is going to be perfect. You're not always going to keep out 100% oil, but you're going to do the best that you can. So now we're going to go and do the same thing to the intake cam as soon as I remove the rockers and I put them back into place where they're supposed to go. Now, as I've been taking apart this engine, I have the sneaking suspicion that it's not necessarily a rod bearing or a main bearing that's spun, although that is still a possibility because I do see fragments of debris into the oil pan and any oil that I've taken, or any component that's been covered in oil that I've taken apart. What I do suspect is that a lifter has also collapsed. That may have been the case when the car sat before I transported it up to my new house, and it sat for about 2 or 3 months. So you know, things being it is what it is, it's really not that big a deal, but we're going to go ahead and continue to tear down and see exactly where it is. Like I said, this car has about 164,000 miles on there. So as you can imagine, it's more than likely due for a rebuild anyway. So yeah, enough jibber jabber. I'm going to go ahead and keep going. So yeah. Oh, before I go any further, the general rule of thumb was that when you're taking things apart on items that have such high torque values or need to be torqued in general, is that you want to get it to be tightened down and removed as evenly as possible. Now, obviously, that cylinder heads, no matter what size engine, be it a 1-cylinder or a inline 6 diesel truck motor, it's essentially the same for each process, right? So when you're tightening down the cylinder head, you start from center out. So you go from here and it kind of does one of these numbers. You tighten it down and it kind of flattens out like so. Same thing with the camshafts. You want to go from center out. And the opposite is true when you're taking it apart. Now, I have worked on motors. I believe it was a Cummins M11, I want to say. I don't remember off the top of my head because it was so long ago, but that was like the one time I've ever seen an engine where you tighten down the front of the cylinder head and then you work your way to the rear. And when you're removing it, you work from the rear to the front. Now, with this Mitsubishi 4G63 in particular, the same goes for tightening down the cylinder head and for the camshafts. You work from center out to tighten it up, and you work from outside in to remove the bolts. So I just wanted to make sure I put that quick admin note in. So this is bearings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. So we're going to go from 1, 6, 2, 5, 3 to 4. Okay, so we're going to take out, we're going to break the bolts loose in that order, and then I'm going to use my dead blow and only the dead blow or rubber mallet and hit the head of these fasteners. Now, these are not torque to yield fasteners. However, I'm going to be using ARP fasteners, so I'm not incredibly worried about any damaging the threads or the heads or whatever when I break them loose. I typically replace fasteners anyway when it comes to critical components. Do you need to? No, it's just a little bit of extra peace of mind, and they're fairly inexpensive, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it. So yeah, let me slow down the process a little bit so you guys can actually see me do it. And notice when I'm doing these, I'm going front to back, but I'm also alternating what bolt I'm taking out.
Okay, so you can see right here, I've got the dead blow. What I did, it's kind of hard to see, but I'm slightly lifting the fastener. I know that underneath these caps is a dowel. You can see that on the exhaust cam side, and it's more or less the same, but there is enough wiggle room within the bolt and its respective hole for that to wiggle loose. Now you can see I got a really tiny flathead screwdriver a couple moments prior to this to gently lift up that cap. So you can see here I'm using that little screwdriver again. You got to be really careful when you're doing that so you don't scratch the surface. It's machined fit, so if you scratch it and you get a nick in it, you won't get a proper seal, which could lead to catastrophic engine failure in the future. You can see here I'm just trying to gently wiggle the cam loose, and I'm kind of using it as a leverage point too. Here we go. Last cap off, so easy peasy.
Now just remember, if your engine is studded, you have to lift the head up high enough so that you clear the studs and the dowels in the block. If you just have regular head bolts, remove the head bolts completely, break the seal on the engine cylinder head from the block, and then lift it up. Also, just remember too that if you have, whether you have bolts or studs, more than likely you're going to have a washer underneath the head of the fastener. The washers for this engine are still on the studs themselves. They're really hard to get. I don't have a magnet strong enough to grab them because, like I said, the oil is very tacky and it's going to kind of glue itself, so to speak, to the block, to the cylinder head. So hopefully when I tap it loose, some of those will kind of jump off and I can remove those before I move the cylinder head. And just remember, once you do that and you see the head kind of move a little bit, give it a quick test on each side to make sure it comes freely completely. Like this side over here is still a little stuck, so we're going to give it a couple love taps. Okay, so now we're at the point of removing the cylinder head from the block. I've already taken off the caps for the camshafts, the rockers, the camshafts themselves, anything else that might be holding this cylinder head to the block itself other than just gravity. So just keep in mind that whether you have studs or you have some other type of fastener, just remember that there may be a washer underneath the head of that fastener. So for example, I have ARP head studs in here The washers for the nuts that go into those studs are still on the block themselves, and I don't have a magnet to go get them, so that is okay. Just gently lift it off vertically, and obviously safety is key. So I can't really lift super high, but I do believe I can get this off by myself, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. The cylinder head on these is only 20-30 pounds, if that. So, and I'll be doing most of the lifting up with my right hand. So in order to kind of break the seal, again, just use a dead blow, tap on the corners, and go ahead and lift off the cylinder head. So let's go ahead and do that and see if we can get this off myself. Yep, easy peasy. All right, so let's re-angle you guys and get you guys down in there, and you guys can see the carnage that has been caused. Okay, and what we're looking at right now is cylinder number 1, and I knew there was an issue with this.